Hi everyone, this is Caly. Thanks so much for being here with me again today. Today I'm sharing a layered water lily card using some Honeybee Stamps products, and I'll be ink blending these layered lilies to get a three-dimensional look with them and create lots of depth and dimension. Here's a look at the Lovely Layers water lily die set from Honeybee Stamps. And I know it might look overwhelming at first seeing all these different dies, but what you see here is a few etched areas on each die. And the etched areas is a big clue as to what's going to be visible once all of the layers are stacked. So I've die cut all of my layers in white here, so it's a little hard to see, but you'll see that it's all etched where they layer and are visible at the very top. I hope that makes sense, but once everything is ink blended and stacked together, you'll see what I mean. So today I'm going to be ink blending these water lilies with three colors. I'm using a light pink. This is Carnation ink from Simon Says Stamp. And because I said that only the etched areas are going to be visible, I'm not ink blending the entire thing. So you know what areas are going to be seen and what aren't, so you don't have to waste ink or spend a lot of time ink blending areas that aren't going to be visible. Now, I wanted to introduce some Heather ink, which is a light purple ink as well. It's kind of bluish, and it just creates a little bit more depth and dimension, and I want to add that to the outer portions of these lovely layers. And you'll also notice too that it goes from largest die to the smallest die, so you'll know what's going to sit in the further back and what's going to sit up front. I really wanted the petals to stand out, so I'm using a brighter pink here. This is rose ink, and I'm only ink blending at the tips of each of the petals. So it kind of looks like a hot mess right now, which it normally does when I'm layering die sets and piecing together parts for flowers. But once everything is layered, you'll see the effect that it has to have multiple colors and in different saturations, and it really does make a huge effect. So I have the floral centers here, and I cut them in yellow cardstock, and I'm going to ink blend the center and the outer portions of the stamen with a little bit of brown ink. This is cappuccino ink. And then moving on to the foliage, I'm using some field ink from Simon Says Stamp as well, and we'll just add a few darker areas to all of those leaves and petals. And then for the lily pads, I'm going to use two colors. While I have the field ink out, I'm going to go ahead and ink blend my lily pads with that first, and I'm just adding an even amount of color around the outer edges and then towards the center as well. And where you can see the lily pad kind of curve inward, it's really going to pick up a lot of ink because of the etched marks that were die cut into it, but I'm also drawing the ink in towards the center as well to create lots of depth and dimension. And then to give it a bit more depth, I'm using pine ink, which is a very dark green ink, and I'm intensifying those curvatures on the lily pad. So when I'm done here, you can see the comparison of the two. You can use one color, it still looks great, but using a darker color really intensifies the leaves' curvatures, and it makes it look a little bit more realistic and a little bit more dimensional. Okay, so once we have everything ink blended and ready to go, I can go ahead and start piecing together all the parts. I've gone ahead and pieced together the water lily centers, and now I'm going to do the water lily flowers. And as I mentioned earlier, you're going to work from the largest die cut to the smallest, and it's really intuitive because you can see where these pieces fit over one another, and there are etched areas that show you where the die would fit over the previous layer. I'll put together that second flower off camera, and then here I'm working on the bud. There are 4 layers, so we're working in the same order from largest to smallest, and then we can go ahead and piece together the bud stem. So there's the foliage layer, and then there's also little foliage details that you're going to see me put on the foliage right now. It just kind of makes it look like those leaves are curving, so it makes it a little bit more realistic. You can even leave this part off if you want to. And then I also created a second stem to put a water lily on also, because they're not always sitting right at the top of a water line or on a lily pad. So it just makes it a little bit more realistic to have some flowers popping up out of the water on a stem. So moving on to the background, I wanted an angled ink blended area, and I'll use some Distress Oxide inks to do this. I'm using Peacock Feathers, Mermaid Lagoon, and then the darkest color is going to be Uncharted Mariner. I really, really love Uncharted Mariner. It's like a dark teal, and it just is great for water, and any kind of dark colors that you're going to be ink blending for greens or blues is going to work for either of those colors. So I think it's a great one to add depth and dimension to ink blending with. To give that ink blended area some texture, I'm going to spritz my panel with 2 sprays using my distress sprayer. And then I can roughly arrange my layout and see where these lilies and buds are going to sit. And then I can adhere them down once I'm happy with the arrangement. So I'm going to lift the flowers up and adhere the lower portions first, which is going to contain the lily pads before I start working on the flowers. I'm using liquid adhesive only for this card because there's lots of layers to each of these flowers from all of the layers that we adhered together. And because they're really not overlapping, there's no reason for me to use foam adhesive to add any sort of dimension. And of course, all of that ink blended really added a lot of depth also. Okay, so once my flowers and everything are adhered down, I'm going to go ahead and adhere it to a card base. I don't have a border on this particular card. I just felt like I needed to fill it out, and then we can work on a sentiment. I have the mini messages from Honeybee Stamps, and these are the mini messages banners dies. It'll die cut all those mini messages of certain sizes, and then it can also add some fishtails if you want fishtails on your sentiment strips. So after embossing this sentiment over some black cardstock in white, I'm going to heat set it, and then I'll buff off that clay embossing powder tool just to get that paper back to a nice crisp black. So I'm going to use the fishtail banner here to go ahead and die cut my sentiment strip. And to add my sentiment strip to my card, I'm using some black foam adhesive strips here, and I'll also use a combination of that foam adhesive with some liquid glue to match the height of the flower that it's resting on at the end there where the fishtail of the banner is. And then I'll use my T-ruler to make sure it's nice and straight before I press it all down, and that finishes my card. I hope you enjoyed this card. If you're interested in any of the products that I use, be sure to check out the links below as well as on the coordinating blog post for this video. Thanks so much for stopping by and have a wonderful day. Bye everyone!